The night after the victory at Winterfell, Arya Stark found herself standing alone in the courtyard, staring at the distant glow of the flames. The winds were bitterly cold, but they didn't numb the ache she felt deep within her chest. The fight against the Night King was over. The living had won, and yet Arya felt no satisfaction. She had been prepared for the death of the undead, for the darkness that would come with that battle. What she hadn't prepared for was this: the emptiness left by the absence of her true enemy. The one who had destroyed everything her family had built, who had crushed the life out of the North with every cruel twist of fate. Cersei Lannister. Her feet dragged through the snow as she moved toward the stables. She was supposed to feel relief, but instead there was only the gnawing need for closure, for justice. "Where is she?" Arya muttered to herself. It had been days since the battle, and her mind couldn't stop racing. She needed to talk to someone, but who? Jon? Daenerys? Neither could possibly understand. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "She's in King's Landing." Arya didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew who it was. Tyrion Lannister stepped forward, his eyes heavy with the weight of their shared history. He had been the one to bring her back to Winterfell, the one who had urged her to stay in the fight. Now, with Cersei gone, Arya had become something more dangerous than an assassin. She had become the one thing Tyrion could never truly control. "You really think killing her will solve anything?" Tyrion asked. Arya turned, meeting his gaze. "She's a plague, Tyrion. She'll keep coming back, and I'll have no peace until she's gone." Tyrion sighed, his voice a mixture of concern and resignation. "And you think you can just walk into King's Landing and kill her?" "I already have," Arya said. Flatly, Tyrion blinked. "What?" "I've made up my mind. Cersei's death is the only way to end this. There will be no more wars over the throne, no more destruction. It's over." Tyrion hesitated, searching her face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Arya Stark had already made her choice. Arya stood at the edge of the Red Keep, watching the city below as the wind carried the sound of distant cries. The kingdom was in mourning, yet her heart felt nothing but resolve. She had been back in Winterfell for weeks now, the weight of victory hanging heavily on her shoulders. The undead were gone, the living had won, but there was no joy in it, only emptiness. The death of the Night King was a victory for all humanity, but it had not been the one that mattered most to her. No, the real battle had been waiting for her in King's Landing, the one that had always been about vengeance, about justice, about Cersei. Arya felt the familiar coldness creep over her skin. She had already made up her mind. There was no turning back. She would not allow Cersei Lannister to get away with everything she had done. The destruction of her family, the manipulation, the lies, and the endless cruelty. Cersei had to be stopped. Arya had always been a force of nature, an instrument of vengeance. When she had come back from Braavos, she had known that the fight was no longer against the dead, but against the living who had wronged her. And now Cersei was the last of the Lannisters, the last of the ones who had stolen her family's life. She wasn't the little girl who used to play in Winterfell anymore. She had been trained by the Faceless Men, and her purpose was clear. Arya Stark would not rest until Cersei was dead. She moved through Winterfell, seeking out her family to tell them of her decision, though she knew they would not approve. Jon Snow, the reluctant king, was already conflicted with the idea of ruling. He had just lost his brothers and sisters in arms to the war against the dead, and now his half-sister, his blood, was setting off on a mission that could throw everything into chaos. Jon was the first to meet her in the halls of Winterfell. His eyes darkened when she told him, "Arya, you can't," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of his own decisions. "Cersei may have done terrible things, but we've won. The realm needs peace. We can't keep fighting, not like this." She shook her head. "Jon, you've fought. You've bled for this. But I've been carrying this hatred for years. It's Not just about the throne, it's about what she did to us, to our family. And I can't move on until she's gone. Jon met her gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only concern and the ever-present sadness. He understood her pain, he did, but he couldn't condone her actions. You're not thinking straight. Killing her won't fix anything. Arya pressed her lips together. I've thought about this for a long time. I'm doing it, Jon, and nothing you say will stop me. Jon reached for her, but she stepped back, her resolve unshaken. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. You won't, she said quietly, but I need to do this. The moon hung low over King's Landing, casting long shadows across the Red Keep. The city was eerily quiet, the aftermath of the war leaving only whispers in its wake. Arya had slipped into the heart of the capital, using the skills she had honed over years of survival to remain unseen. Tonight, the hunt would end. She approached the Red Keep with quiet steps, her heart thudding as she ascended the familiar steps. Cersei's reign had been built on cruelty, and Arya had watched it crumble from afar. She had been present for every battle, every betrayal. But this moment was different. Arya's hand tightened around the hilt of the dagger she had carried with her since Braavos, the very one that had once been used to end the lives of those who had hurt her. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei was alone in her chamber, gazing out over the city. She had been expecting this, Arya realized. The Queen was not a fool. She had known that someone would eventually come for her. Is this what you want, Arya Stark? Cersei's voice rang out, rich with disdain. Do you think killing me will make everything right? That the blood of your family can be washed away with my death? Arya didn't answer immediately. She stepped forward, the cold air of the chamber biting her skin, as she raised her eyes to the woman who had been the architect of her family's downfall. Cersei turned, her face a mask of haughty arrogance. Do you really think your family's death will mean anything to me? I will be remembered long after you're gone, girl. You've already been forgotten, Cersei, Arya said, her voice low and steady. You just haven't realized it yet. Cersei's eyes flared with fury, but she knew her time was up. Arya had already made her choice. Arya lunged forward, the dagger flashing through the air with lethal precision. She didn't give Cersei a chance to plead for her life. The death came swift, silent, and final. As Cersei's body crumpled to the ground, Arya stood over her, feeling nothing, no joy, no relief, just the heavy weight of the past lifted from her shoulders. The news spread through Westeros faster than wildfire. Cersei Lannister, the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, was dead, and no one knew who had struck the final blow. Whispers filled every corner of the kingdom, and the power vacuum in King's Landing was immediate. Daenerys Targaryen, sitting in the council chambers, had been preparing for the final push to claim her throne, but the death of Cersei left her in a state of confusion. She had long seen Cersei as her rival, the one person standing between her and the Iron Throne, but now that she was gone, Daenerys was left with no clear adversary. She's gone, Daenerys, Tyrion said, his voice tinged with disbelief. We should be celebrating. But Daenerys didn't share his enthusiasm. The absence of Cersei was unsettling, like the sudden loss of a storm that had been raging. For years, there was no final, glorious battle, no climactic moment of triumph, just silence. Jon Snow, too, was troubled by the news. He stood on the walls of Winterfell, looking out over the snow-covered land. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. Arya's actions had irrevocably changed the course of history. The realm won't know what to do with itself, Jon muttered. What happens now? Tyrion stood beside him, his face drawn with worry. We'll have to rebuild, Jon. We'll have to rebuild everything, and we'll have to decide who's going to rule it. Jon nodded grimly. I never wanted this. I never wanted to lead. Neither did she. Tyrion said quietly, referring to Daenerys, "but power has a way of choosing you, whether you want it or not." The air in King's Landing was thick with tension. With Cersei's death, the city that had long been her playground was now a battleground. For the first time in years, there was no clear ruler. The factions within the city were splintered. Some rallied behind Daenerys Targaryen, believing that the death of Cersei should make her the rightful queen. Others, however, saw Jon Snow, the bastard-turned-king, as the more legitimate ruler given his Targaryen blood. The city was on the brink of civil war, and the flames of chaos were only fanned by the presence of the two Targaryens. Daenerys had come to King's Landing with fire in her eyes, certain that she was the one who should sit on the Iron Throne. But as she watched the empty streets of the Red Keep, she could feel the weight of Cersei's absence. This had been her rival, the person who had torn her family apart, who had orchestrated the downfall of so many. And yet, now that Cersei was gone, the moment of triumph was hollow. Daenerys could feel her resolve slipping. Jon Snow had not wanted to be here. He had not wanted to lead the forces of Westeros, to take the throne that had once been denied to him. He had fought for survival, for family, for honor, but never for power. Now, as he walked the halls of the Red Keep, he was reminded of the ghosts that haunted this place, his father, Ned Stark, and the people he had loved and lost. The Iron Throne felt like a seat of death, not one of glory. "Aegon Targaryen," Tyrion said quietly as he joined Jon on the balcony overlooking the city. "You should sit on the throne. They'll rally behind you." Jon shook his head. "I'm not that man, Tyrion. I'm not the king they think I am." "Then what are you, Jon Snow?" Tyrion asked, his eyes piercing into him. "I'm just a man trying to do what's right," Jon replied, his voice heavy with the burden of leadership. But Tyrion wasn't done. "If we leave this to Daenerys, we risk plunging the kingdom into madness. She has the dragons, Jon, and she'll burn it all down if she doesn't get what she wants." Jon knew that Tyrion was right. Daenerys' obsession with the throne was becoming dangerous, her vision of liberation turning into something darker with each passing day. Her unyielding need for control was a powder keg, and Jon could feel it tightening around them. The Iron Throne was a symbol of power, but in the hands of someone so consumed by her destiny, it would only bring destruction. "I can't lead like she does," Jon said, "but I won't let her burn everything down either." The day of reckoning had arrived. Daenerys stood at the gates of the Red Keep, her army gathered around her, ready to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. But despite the thousands at her back, she knew that the path ahead would not be simple. The realm was divided, and her own allies were beginning to question her methods. Tyrion had tried to reason with her. He had pleaded for peace, for unity, but Daenerys' fury had only grown. She had come to King's Landing not to negotiate, but to conquer, and if the people of Westeros refused to bow to her, she would burn them all. Jon Snow stood at the opposite side of the courtyard, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was about to happen. He had spoken with Daenerys earlier, trying to reason with her, but her mind was made up. She would take the throne by fire or by blood. "Arya warned me," Jon said quietly to Tyrion, his voice tinged with sorrow. "She told me this would happen, that she would not stop until Cersei was dead. And now it's all falling apart." Tyrion looked grim. "We're not the only ones at war, Jon. The real battle is not between you and Daenerys. It's between the people of Westeros and the idea of absolute power." Jon nodded. "And I fear Daenerys is already too far gone. The Red Keep was about to erupt in flames. Daenerys' forces surrounded the city, the air thick with the promise of fire. The clash between Jon and Daenerys was inevitable, but neither of them were ready for the decision they would soon face. Inside the great hall of the Red Keep, Daenerys stood at the top of the steps, her expression cold and unyielding. She had already sent word to Jon, demanding that he meet her face to face. Her dragon, Drogon, circled above the city, his wings casting shadows over the gathering army. Jon entered, his armor heavy with the weight of his decision. His heart beat in his chest like a war drum, a steady thrum that mirrored the rhythm of the chaos building around them. Daenerys met his gaze, her eyes full of fire and fury. "Jon," Daenerys said, her voice hard, "you cannot stop this. I will take what is mine." Jon looked at her, his heart breaking. He had loved her once, truly. But now he saw a woman consumed by power, by a need that could not be sated. She had once spoken of freeing the oppressed, of ending the tyranny that had plagued Westeros, but now she was becoming the very thing she had fought against. "I can't let you do this," Jon said, stepping closer. "You'll destroy everything we fought for. And what would you have me do?" Daenerys' voice cracked, the pressure of the moment seeping into her tone. "Give up? Allow Westeros to fall back into the hands of the Lannisters, to men like my brother who destroyed my family? No, Jon, I will not be denied." Jon's heart wavered, but his resolve was stronger. "Cersei is dead. The war is over. You don't need to burn the world to prove your right to rule." Daenerys shook her head. "It's not about the throne. It's about what I've lost, what we've all lost." Her gaze softened for a moment, but the fire in her eyes never dimmed. "I'm doing this for us, Jon, for all of us." Jon took a step forward, but before he could speak, Arya Stark appeared at the edge of the room, her face set in determination. She had arrived, as she always did, just when things were at their worst. Her presence was like a spark in the dry tinder of their arguments. "Arya," Jon said, surprised to see her there. "What are you doing here?" "Stopping you," Arya replied simply, her voice unwavering. "You can't let her do this." Jon turned to face his sister, a mixture of confusion and understanding in his eyes. Arya had always been willing to act when the world stood still, and now her conviction was clearer than ever. "Then what do you want me to do, Arya?" Jon asked, his voice rising. "You think I should kill her? End it all?" Arya's eyes flicked toward Daenerys, and for a moment there was silence. "No," she said softly, but her tone carried the weight of everything she had been through. "But you can stop her. You can stop this madness before it consumes us all." The room was charged with tension, the fate of Westeros hanging by a thread. Jon faced the woman he loved and the sister he had fought beside. The choices before him were impossible, but one thing was certain: whatever decision he made, it would change everything. The tension in the great hall was unbearable, the stillness of the air thick with the weight of impending decisions. Jon stood between Daenerys and Arya, each of them representing a different path for the future of Westeros. The very air seemed to hum with the possibility of destruction or salvation. Daenerys' eyes remained fixed on Jon, pleading, begging for him to stand with her. "You know what we're fighting for, Jon. You know what it means. I can free this realm from the chains of the past, but you have to be with me." Jon's heart ached. He had once believed in her vision, but now it seemed as if her path was no longer about freeing the oppressed, but about securing her own throne, no matter the cost. "I wanted to believe in you," Jon said, his voice low and heavy with the weight of his inner conflict. "I wanted to believe in us. But this is not the way." Arya stepped forward, her expression hard but filled with a strange mixture of regret and resolve. She had seen this path before, had walked it herself, and she knew the cost of letting power consume a person. "Jon's right, Daenerys," Arya said. "The people of Westeros don't need a queen who will burn their cities down to prove. She's in charge. You want to free them? Free them from the fire, from the madness." Daenerys' expression faltered, the mask she had worn so well slipping for just a moment. But the fire inside her never died. "And if I don't fight for this, Arya, who will? You. You think the world will change just because Cersei's dead?" There's always someone else who'll take her place. The throne will always be contested. Maybe, Arya replied, stepping forward to stand beside Jon, but not if it's built on blood and fire. Daenerys's lips parted, her anger rising again. You think you know better, you who have killed without remorse, you who've watched everything you love burn and still, you think you have the right to tell me how to rule. Arya's eyes narrowed, the steel in her gaze cold. I know the cost of vengeance, Daenerys, and I've seen what it does to the soul. You're heading down a path where there will be nothing left of you. Jon looked between the two women, the woman he had loved and the sister who had always been the embodiment of stark resolve. He had made his choice, but he could not bear to see either of them destroyed by their choices. I don't want to be the one who stops you, Jon said softly. But I can't let you do this, Daenerys. Daenerys's breath hitched, her fury giving way to a moment of vulnerability. She was still the same woman who had once trusted Jon with her heart, the same woman who had shared dreams of a better world. But now, that dream seemed to be slipping from her grasp, consumed by her need for control. Her hands trembled at her sides. I thought you understood, Daenerys whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I thought you would be with me until the end. I can't be, Jon said, his voice shaking with the weight of his own decision. Not like this. For a moment, there was silence. The only sound was the distant echo of Drogon's wings as the dragon circled above kings. Landing? It was a sound that had once been a symbol of hope for Daenerys, but now it felt more like an omen. I'm sorry, Jon added, his voice barely above a whisper. Daenerys looked at him for a long moment, and in her eyes Jon saw a mixture of pain, fury, and the remnants of the woman she had once been. But there was no going back now. Daenerys turned away, walking to the center of the hall. Then we are enemies, she said, her voice low, cold, and filled with finality. Jon's heart sank, but he couldn't follow her. He had made his decision. He had chosen the people of Westeros over his love for her. He had chosen what was right, not what felt right. Arya, Jon said, his voice thick with sorrow. I can't do this alone. We need to stop her. Arya nodded, her face set with determination. We will. The final battle for the Iron Throne was not one fought on the fields of Westeros, but within the walls of King's Landing itself. It was a battle of ideologies, of destinies, of power, and of the hearts of the men and women who would shape the future. Daenerys had gathered her forces, the remnants of her army still loyal to her cause. Drogon circled above, casting long shadows over the city below. It was a terrifying image, one that filled the people of King's Landing with fear. But it was not just fear that the people felt. It was a sense of inevitability. For too long they had lived under the weight of monarchs who ruled with cruelty, who sought power for their own gain. Now the question was whether the people could stand against Daenerys's flame. Jon Snow, Arya Stark and Tyrion Lannister led a group of loyalists into the heart of the city. They had no dragons, no armies, but they had the support of those who still believed that Westeros could be ruled with justice, not fire. The people gathered at the gates of the Red Keep, watching as Daenerys descended the steps, Drogon by her side. The city was silent, waiting for the decision that would determine the fate of the realm. Jon faced Daenerys once more, his eyes heavy with the grief of what had to be done. This isn't you, he said, his voice thick with sorrow. You're not the dragon, you're the breaker of chains, remember that. Daenerys looked at him, her expression unreadable. I remember, she said softly, but sometimes to break the chains you have to burn the world. In a flash the city erupted in chaos. Drogon unleashed a torrent of fire, and Jon and Arya rushed forward, but not to fight Daenerys. They fought to protect the people, to prevent the destruction that would come from her wrath. The final confrontation was brief, but it was devastating. Jon reached Daenerys as she stood with Drogon, her eyes wild with the need for control. In the end, it was Jon who ended the reign of the Dragon Queen, not with a blade, but with words that cut deeper than steel. "I'm sorry," Jon said, his voice choked with emotion. "I wish it could have been different." With that, he turned away, leaving Daenerys to face her downfall. The world was forever changed. The ashes of King's Landing still smouldered, but the people slowly began to rebuild. Jon Snow, though reluctant, was declared king, his leadership born not of conquest but of sacrifice. Arya left Westeros. She had done what she set out to do, and now the world was no longer hers to change. She sailed west, seeking the unknown. Her journey of vengeance now behind her, Jon ruled with a heavy heart, knowing that his path had been one of necessity, not desire. He would never be the king they all hoped for, but he would be the king they needed, and so Westeros began again, not under the rule of fire and blood, but under the rule of those who had survived the madness. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. As Jon stood on the balcony of the Red Keep, looking out over the city, he couldn't help but wonder if there was a better way, a way where power didn't corrupt. He had made his choices, but those choices would haunt him forever. Still, he believed in the people of Westeros. Perhaps they could rebuild. The wind carried the scent of the sea. The people had not forgotten, but they had moved on. And for the first time, Jon believed that the world might yet find peace.